Hey everybody, I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSC Squared podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the PBSC podcast and another episode. It's Mark and Steve here with episode 266 today. Little bit of a different question today. It's kind of an interesting podcast title, and it's going to be an interesting podcast. We got a submission from a partner that we thought would be good to address. And as you can see, is my partner a sex addict, or is he just getting back at me? He says he can stop anytime. And so that's kind of the question proposed. And we'll read her statement here to give a little bit more context, and we'll dive right into this. And this is from a partner. Recently, I discovered my husband of 20 years infidelity. So she was the one that found it out. This came to light as I found sure evidence he was hiding, or he was finding his way to sex workers, massage parlors, and online websites. He admitted this had been going on for a while, and that he's gone to these places when he was mad at me. His poor treatment of me and our marriage has been going on for years. I thought I'd finally walk out and be done, but with 20 years and 2 young kids, it's tough to end it. I'm staying because there is therapy and spiritual effort on his part. So she's been through all this. She found this stuff out, but he seems to be expressing some desire to change and following through with that to some degree, which is why she says she's sticking it out so far.
Yeah, and she says this all came out after 20 years of marriage.
Yes, so long time.
Mm-hmm.
I think he thought I'd leave because he was very mean in his attitude towards me for years. And we're going to talk about that one that piece in a second. But when I didn't yell or scream, and after I got out of bed where I cried for 2 weeks, he's seen the character that I have and how strong and dedicated I am to our bond. He's actually started being very responsive to my needs. My big question is, why couldn't he communicate with me about his problems, about his needs, about his pain? Why did he think that after 20 years he couldn't talk to me? He says he can stop all of his betrayal behaviors, that he has no more desire for them, but he also called himself an addict, so I'm confused. Was all of this just about him being mad at me and acting like a real disconnected? Well, she uses an abbreviation, but you all know me, a disconnected asshole. Or is he an addict? And what about my increased sex drive since Discovery Day? Our sex is better than ever, but I'm scared that I'm doing some sort of trauma reaction. Thank you for your insight. Okay, so there's a lot here.
There is a lot going on. In fact, we had originally responded to her and just said, we don't know how we can even begin to tackle
this in a podcast.
So we referred her to some really good professional resources. But as we looked at it, we thought, there's some really good points in here and things that really need to be addressed. Mm-hmm. So we thought, let's tackle it.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a good one because this is not a good brag, but this is where my experience, I guess, in particular would be good because I want to throw out, this is a common story, right? I mean, or something along these lines. And the reactions from a partner vary, but I think the psychology in a lot of cases is fairly similar for addicts who struggle. And I think it's one of those dynamics, Mark. I mean, you and I were actually talking about this just the other day during another recording of another kind where I think that there are some elements to an addict's behavior that in terms of actually making sense, only makes sense to another addict, honestly.
It's true.
I mean, we look at like we talk often on here and in Dare to Connect and things about, we'll share stories or events. And I know it happens for me all the time where I can clearly recount, and I'm going to do that in a second here, about what my logic about something was at the time. And the old part of my brain that recounts it remembers it making perfect sense. Like,
oh, yeah.
Clear as day. Like, it's just like, oh, of course it works this way.
Well, and it's kind of, it's kind of disturbing because as you and I read through all of these behaviors she's describing in her partner, we're like, well, yeah, of course. Right. From
Yes.
an addict's brain standpoint, there's nothing in here that we said, I don't get that. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, this from the addict side, we can see all of this. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in this podcast.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and there really is some seemingly crazy behavior that again is hard to understand unless you understand the world of an addict. But I'll do my best to describe because what I wanted to throw out there as we kind of get started. Obviously, we can't mind read anything here, but we definitely understand this partner's confusion and kind of looking at this with sort of befuddlement. And then obviously she has these other questions. So I I mean, as I was reading this, I actually remarked to Mark as we were getting ready for the podcast. I mean, this first portion where she talks about not in regard to hiding it for 20 years, but the length of time and more specifically the cruelty or the anger or the emotional abuse or the all the other forms of disengagement that this guy related. It pains me to say that I connect with a lot of it because that for me was how I showed up in my addiction history with my wife, Brittany.
Well,
Um,
and there is a distinction between you and what appears to be this guy. It does appear that she is the one that discovered all of this.
exactly. Yeah, I think I
She
just mentioned
didn't
that in
come
the email.
forward. She found the evidence after 20 years of marriage, and that yeah, it's just, so this didn't come from him. Where you, Steve, you were honest with with Brittany from day one.
And that is true, but at the same time, in terms of like the emotional variability, I'm sure. I mean, it would be interesting to bring Brittany in here and ask her, but it would not shock me if Brittany were to read this and not connect with some of what she is saying because I know that my wife at times was just probably baffled by my behavior because at times I would act so loving and caring, but then on other times, and I will throw it out there, I wasn't because I think that would be shaming myself as an identity, but attribute wise, I acted like an absolute asshole.
Mm.
I was terrible to Brittany at times. And I think one of the hardest parts about that was that I was probably, and we're kind of reading between the lines here, but it wouldn't shock me if this were the case for this couple. It was so all over the board. Like it was completely unpredictable. There was no way to know how bad I would show up at any given time. I was completely emotionally dysregulated is the term. And I just want to talk for a minute about some of the reasons behind that. And this sucks and this maybe makes some listeners look differently at me. I don't know, but I mean, just talking turkey, there are some reasons. The first reason
Well,
why I think I
and
go ahead.
can I say something?
Yeah.
Because I think it would be important for me to present the other side of an addict here, right? Steve, you said, you treated Brittany very poorly. You were emotionally dysregulated, right? All these, anger and outbursts. Who's going to show up? Which Steve's going to show up? The crazy, angry, out of control, or whatever. I just want to say that I related to what this partner sent in as well. Now I am like this guy. I kept all of it hidden, like very carefully. I was like the stealth king. I was so deathly afraid of being found out and what that would mean. But the way I mistreated my wife was not through anger or really treating her cruelly. Well, not through anger or outbursts. I would go silent. I would go stoic. I would disappear and shut down and just not show up at all. And I want to submit in this podcast today that that is no less abusive than a more outward, overt demonstration of anger or whatever. In some ways, it can be even more cruel and traumatic to a partner when somebody just goes silent and disappears, turns into a granite wall, which was me. And so I did, a very important part of this. And also the other thing I related to, I didn't say this to my wife, but there were times where I would act out of my addiction to not punish her, get back at her because of ways that I felt she was neglecting me. She wasn't showing up sexually the way, my addict brain wanted her to. right? There were ways that I was resentful, that I was, that I felt that she wasn't giving me all the things I wanted. And so in my little silent temper tantrum, I would go act out. So
Hmm.
I could relate to that as well. Right. So you can see there are different ways that addicts will manifest these things, not just in the overt way she's describing.
Yeah. Well, and if I kind of relate back to what I was saying, I mean, looking at this, I just I mean, if I'm trying to give some insight into maybe some potential thinking on his end. Now, I didn't realize this at the time when I was treating my wife in a similar fashion, but I would do that for a few reasons. The first was I was a coward,
Mm,
meaning that I had lots of feelings going on inside of me, a lot of anger, frustration, unresolved trauma, to name a few. And again, it's twisted, but it is reality. I looked at Brittany as a safe dumping ground for that.
yes.
She was a safe place to just throw those things at. I was both I should say cowardly and unaware. I didn't want to confront other people about those things where I could have or should have, because that would have been too much. And so in that way, I took advantage of Brittany in terms of I'm going to just vent all this garbage on her. I think the other reason why was there was a lot that I had that I needed to discharge somewhere, but didn't have healthier alternatives for processing it and hadn't learned skills for navigating the feelings tied to it. And so uh, those also got vented there as well. And I know for her it was very confusing. I think I know we had conversations where she may not have said it outright, but where she was genuinely like, "Do you love me? Do you not? Like, what are we doing? You know, I'm so confused. Like, do we want to be married? Right? It wasn't even they weren't even conversations about. We weren't even to the point yet of, I don't know if we can be. It was like, like, why are we together? Like, this is so weird. I mean, you're treating me so poorly one day and not the next. So that emotional confusion, I think, in and of itself, for many of you partners, we know is just as traumatic as the behavior and the conduct itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Never knowing where you stand. But if you're looking for some insight, I had all that self-loathing, I had all that anger and frustration, and that needed to be addressed and dealt with. And again, Brittany was a safe dumping spot, which is not fair, nor is it okay. But I think for many of the men that we work with, and it would not shock me if that were the case here, it to some degree or another still is.
And as confused and bewildered as betrayed partners are, legitimately, once we addicts start to gain a voice and actually begin to understand ourselves just a little bit, we admit that we were confused and bewildered as well. Right. And we didn't know where we were coming from, she didn't know who was going to show up. We didn't know who was going to show up either. Right. It's mass internal emotional confusion within the addict brain. And it's why we call addiction insanity. So very much a part of this.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that regard. And again, there could be lots of other things present and on we don't know the full story there. But I think the one thing that I definitely would say, at least to that beginning, in our beginning response to her different questions and thoughts, is we'll say it was the same thing we every partner needs to hear and know whatever's going on with him, and however much when addiction is involved of this nature, however much is going on with him, in far more cases than not, what we find is that the vast majority of the issues that are being presented, as much as he may present them as a you issue or an us issue, there are definitely us issues, but more of those are his to own and are of an external making than they are you. I mean, I just met with a partner the other day where in one of our earlier meetings where we talked about this very thing, that the issues that your addict partner is dealing with right now, they have roots in a time and in a time of life and in a space that predates you by decades in some
Yep.
cases. You're
Yep.
the one on the scene dealing with the end result, and logically it makes sense why you're hurt and offended by his actions, but you do need to know that even as much as he may direct those things at you, that doesn't make you accountable for them.
No, no,
So
it doesn't. It
anyway.
doesn't. And she asked this question. So is he an addict? Or as he claims, only used these betraying behaviors to get back at me when he was mad. I read that and I said, well, you're stating the same thing, right? Well, I'm not an addict. I just use bad behaviors and betraying behaviors to get back at you when I'm mad at you.
Hmm.
That's what addicts do, right? We don't own our crap and come forward and say, hey, here's what I'm feeling inside. Here's some things that you've done that didn't meet my needs or I didn't agree with. We don't come and openly discuss like mature people what's going on. We just shrink away and go act out badly in betraying behaviors and kind of throwing a tantrum. But this
Hmm.
is this is part of addiction. So when I read it, well, what's the difference? Is he an addict or did he just do these things to get back at me when he was mad? Well, that's what addicts do, right? This is what people with compulsive behaviors that are out of control do. And really big, again, we don't know the first thing about this guy, just what she sent, but boy, did alarms go off when she said, he says he has no more desire for any of these past behaviors and he just simply has quit.
Hmm.
I'm like, whoa, whoa, okay, hold on. 20 years of marriage. She doesn't say how long she found out this has all been going on, but I have to guess, for if not the whole 20 years, probably some significant time because she's the only one that finally found out. But he just magically quit. He does no more desire for any of these betraying behaviors because, as she said, they're having great sex now. He's got apparently a therapist. He's doing some spiritual work. So it's all gone. It's all done. Now, is that possible? Uh, I'm not here to say what is or isn't with this guy, but Steve, how many, literally now, thousands of times have we heard this from addicts?
I mean, it's very common, and here again, I think it's good to maybe give some insight for both addicts and partners listening again, and then we can speak to our what we've seen and to our own history. When this would show up for me, when I would have these periods where I would be heavily accountable or really work on the behavior, there were oftentimes a couple of things going on for me. Usually, that was driven by a strong sense of internal shame and or maybe mixed in with some healthy guilt. I was connecting on some level, functionally or not, with the disparity and the unfairness of what I was doing. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would make some changes. I would take a step back. The other reason why that would also happen is because my wife might, and I use the term escalate not in terms of a spouse doing this on purpose or in a nefarious way at all, but the consequences within the relationship would escalate in some way. So I'd see my wife hit, for example, a new level of emotionality, or a new level of frustration, or a new consequence would be on the table,
Mm-hmm.
and those would quote unquote kind of shake me into a headspace of whoa, and I guess you could say it would scare me, for lack of a better term. I think it would scare me straight for on the emotional spectrum for a time.
Well, and
Um,
Steve, that's another sign of addiction or compulsion is my efforts match hers. If she's escalating the consequences and she's finally getting to the place where she's just not willing to take the abuse anymore, so she starts to hold her ground and speak her truth, I will then match my increased efforts according to that temperature in her. But if she goes back to being nurturing and sort of going along to get along, then my efforts just go right back on down. And
yeah.
so, right, that's hey everybody, PBSE podcast hosts Mark and Steve here with a special message about our revolutionary online recovery program for addict spouses and couples called Dare to Connect. Multiple times every week, we get messages from subscribers in the program. They're people just like you. They're trying to heal from the devastation of sex and porn addiction and betrayal trauma. And here's a few of our most recent submissions. Here's one from an addict in recovery. It says D2C has principles that everyone should utilize regardless of their circumstances. It doesn't matter your coping mechanisms. It matters that you want to work towards genuine connection with your partner.
That's awesome. Another testimony from an addict continues on. My wife is just starting out in training as a licensed therapist. Dare to Connect has been far more useful to her than her degree.
Wow.
The way Mark and Steve apply what they've learned is always so redemptive. D2C has opened doors for my relationship that I thought would be shut forever. Mark and Steve are an incredible resource of information on the subject of sex addiction and betrayal trauma. We could not do this journey without their help.
Here's one from a partner who's been with us for nearly a year. I want you both to know that it is because of you guys and D2C that I'm able to be in the place that I am today. I will always be grateful to you both for your feedback and prompt replies to my questions. I can't even come close to putting it into words how valuable my time spent with y'all this past year has been to my life. Thank you for everything you taught me about betrayal trauma and boundaries and thinking errors and loving myself and making myself a priority and standing up for myself.
Love that. Love that submission. And then as we close out here today, guys, one more account from another addict in recovery. I wish I had a platform like this 14 years ago where I could have learned and done the hard work of recovery before I had done all this damage to myself and to my spouse. And to be candid with all of you, that's exactly why we created Dare to Connect. Mark and I found ourselves in that place. Messages like these and the others like them, they're what Dare to Connect really is all about, guys, and why Mark and I do what we do. Whether you're an addict or a partner of an addict, and no matter where you find yourself in the recovery process, Dare to Connect can take you to the next level. Don't wait another day to catapult your recovery forward. Today is your day for change. Visit us at daretoconnectnow.com to pick up your free 2-week trial of Dare to Connect today.
Yeah.
Well, and there can be that mirroring, but for me, to be honest with you, that wasn't how it showed up for me. It wouldn't be so much of a mirroring. It would be more of a fear factor like response. It would be much more of a fear / some sort of sense of accountability there, and a recognition. But the problem was, and now is that a bad thing? At least in some ways, I would argue no. But the problem is that I wasn't taking a hold of that as like a catalyst point for asking the bigger question, which is, okay, this is clearly a problem. Something significant needs to change. Clearly something is off, right? And starting down what we would call maybe a healthier or a real recovery path.
Yeah.
It would be very much, that candle would burn out. That gratitude would fade, or that shock would fade, or that guilt, or whatever it was that was doing it. Now, there could be other things too. And again, we're suppositioning a lot of things here, okay? That we're just throwing out potential alternatives. With the sex, we're kind of bouncing around because her questions kind of bounce all around. With the sex being better than ever. Now, there are lots of reasons why that could be.
A lot.
But one that we would throw out as a possibility is, for example, oftentimes when you get that, that hit of increased connection, even though it's not a sustainable hit of increased connection, where he's being nicer or whatever, she might be showing up more connected or passionate or whatever, which could in some ways be impacting him in a healthy way. In some ways, it could be feeding an addiction if it is present. But either way, I have seen that cycle repeat with other people or other clients that I've worked with where, following some sort of a dynamic like this, that will oftentimes accompany it. And then we make the mistake of saying, oh, well, things must be really better, when they're actually not. We haven't again resolved anything, right? We haven't fixed anything. We might be engaging with each other in a more positive way from like an engagement style, but the underpinning reasons behind that aren't sustainable, nor are we making actual changes or looking at real issues, right? That's just the circumstances, the situation has kind of created a little emotional bubble, for lack of a better term. It's like a little air bubble in the ocean where it's like, oh, we feel so good in here, but it's not. It's temporary. It's fleeting. It's not real.
Yeah, we call it
Right.
the pink cloud. We call
that's a term for it, for sure.
Novelty. And to really reach out to betrayed partners. They're yearning for connection. They're desperate for connection. And now things get just a little bit better, just a little bit. Even in this case, after she discovered it, he apparently is making some spiritual efforts. It sounds like he's maybe engaged with therapy. She's thinking, oh my gosh, there's some hope here. And in that little glimpse of hope, partners can really latch on to that because they're desperate for things to be better, to connect, to whatever. And so, yeah, the sex might be great all of a sudden. But again, is that the pink cloud? Is that, we call it hopium? Am I high on hopium?
Yeah.
Or is this actually real? And
Yes.
that's what we don't know. And every guy listening who knows he's got an addiction or compulsion or doesn't know or is denying, right? You need to really take a look at this and say what is real recovery? What is a real trajectory moving forward? What does it mean for me to proactively take accountability and responsibility for my own progress moving ahead now? What does that look like? And is that what is happening here, or is it something else? I always worry when a guy says, I have no more desire for that. It's gone. And I just have so much hesitation because we've been doing this for more than 20 years. I have heard that so many times. I engaged in it sometimes. I'd start doing something new and novel. I'd get a little bit of sobriety under my belt. And how many times did I say, I got this? Right? We call those the three most feared words in recovery. I got this. And I would think, I'm past this. This is done. And then boom, right back. Why? Because I didn't have a realistic view and I hadn't taken the steps for actual in the trenches, peeling back all the deep layers, doing the hard work of recovery. I wasn't all in. I was just going on this pink cloud or, this hopium of the whole thing.
Hmm.
And it just seems like that's some of what's happening here.
Yeah, I feel that as well. And oftentimes I think that for many partners that connection can be enhanced. I think in some ways I'm saying something different, but also similar to what Mark's saying, where it's I mean, when somebody feels desperate for connection in any way, right, in a relationship, and there seems to be an outlet or a way where that's happening, it's not uncommon, right, to overly invest, overly emphasize, even become myopic in that area.
Oh yeah, you latch onto it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for
Which
sure.
again makes sense. I mean, you're literally desperate for it. It's not happening in other ways. Here's this one area. So again,
Yeah.
this is a lot of supposition. We don't want to, we're not speaking for this addict or for the partner. We're just
Yeah.
describing
No.
some common
Yep.
dynamics that we see in these kinds of situations.
Just throwing out ideas. Steve, let's talk for a minute about what could a partner do, a betrayed partner who's, addict or compulsive partner or somebody who says they never were an addict. They're starting to make some efforts. Things are looking like they could be better.
Hmm.
How does a betrayed partner protect herself so that she doesn't just go all in something that she's not sure what it is yet?
Yeah. Well, again, giving the caveat that we only get so much of a viewpoint into the dynamics of a relationship when somebody submits something to us, because what we read to you is what we got. Like, there's not
What we
more
got?
to it. It's just a little window. But if I'm working with this addict or this partner, I think one of the first things, if I'm the partner, that's a better way to say it. I would say, regardless of anything else going on, as a partner, given the secretive nature of this, given the fact that I found this out after 20 years, given his behaviors and shifts and all those things, part of my requirement would either be couples therapy with that same therapist that he's seeing, or I'd be asking for couples therapy as a standalone with a full sharing of that story and of that history. And then I'd be collaborating with that therapist on transparent, verifiable, tangible benchmarks for what a recovery process would look like. And I would be asking for, in whatever way that professional thinks is appropriate, updates on how that's going for him. Because if I'm there after
Yeah.
20 years of this, and I'm going to keep investing, and I have so much on the line, I think it's personally, maybe some who listen to this are going to disagree, and even some colleagues of mine might disagree. But I think that it's more than fair for a wife who finds themselves in this position after 20 years of this kind of nonsense as well as deception. I don't think there's anything wrong with a partner saying, if I'm going to continue to invest in this, just like in a company, right? I need to see tangible results, benchmarks, and verification of what you're saying.
Absolutely. Yep. There needs to be, yep, trust but verify.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would ask, she doesn't say whether this is so or not. Has there been a formal disclosure, a professionally guided formal disclosure? Or has he just said, well, yeah, here's what I did and what's been going on, and that's it? According to him, this you have the full story now, partner.
Yeah.
That's not, I would say there needs to be a formal disclosure where all things come out for the past 20 years, all of it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Right? Because how can she make a decision about what to do going forward if she doesn't know this guy? She
Yeah,
needs to know him in all the aspects. So that definitely needs to take place. She
absolutely.
asked another question. Why don't these addicts come to their partners with their problems and their issues instead of going off and handling it alone in these betraying behaviors? Boy, oh boy, can I answer that one from personal experience. I didn't go to my partner with my issues. I went and, quote, handled them by myself. Why? Number one, I didn't have the skills to do so. I didn't practice confiding in another person. I was scared to death to be seen, right? To be transparent, to put my whole self out there, the good, the bad, the ugly. I didn't want to show people the real me. I wanted to hide all of that and just put on a facade or a mask or a certain kind of portrayal that I thought would please others. They would accept me by what I was showing them. I wanted to control how much of myself I showed to others, especially my partner. So I
Mhm.
didn't confide in her. I went other places to handle it. And that's excruciatingly difficult for a betrayed partner because here's what my wife said as we got healthier, and she just looked at me. She said, "Did you have that little faith and confidence in my ability to help you? Did you think that little of me, that I just wasn't intelligent enough or capable enough or resilient enough to handle what you would bring to me?" She said,
Mhm.
"I have to tell you, that just crushes my soul to think that you thought that little of me, that you had to go all these other places and never came to me. What does that say about what you thought of me?" Right? Such a raw thing for partners when this comes up.
Yeah, that would absolutely agree. Well, we hope that is a kind of a foray into the wide cornucopia of questions
Oh my gosh, that's why
that
we were
were
like, I don't know if we could tackle this
it's kind
because
of all over the board. It's a little bit of a different podcast today, but hopefully that gives all of you something to kind of chew on if you find yourself in a similar dynamic. There's a lot there, and there's a lot to unpack. Wherever you find yourself in this road of recovery, our this will never be a Joe Rogan podcast or some other podcast that has millions of viewers. And in a way, I'd say thank God for that because we although it could have millions of viewers for what we perceive as the need out there. But if you like what you're hearing on the podcast, as always, we would definitely invite you to come and try our Dare to Connect program for addict spouses and couples. We are doing new and exciting things and adding things to that every day. Uh, Couples navigating these difficult issues like this in the trenches. One thing that we're covering right now in the program is that whatever else you might need in this process, you need a support circle of advocates and allies who get where you're coming from.
yes,
Recovery and change from this process, we would hands down tell you, whoever, no matter who you are, it never happens in a vacuum. And so we would invite you to be filling that circle with valuable people. And we would humbly submit Dare to Connect might be something to add to that in terms of getting collaboration with people who get it, professional feedback from therapists who've been there, and support from people who are navigating the same things as you right now. And you can find more information about that at daretoconnectnow.com. As always, you can also send us topics for the podcast if you go to that same website, daretoconnectnow.com. Up at the top, click on the PBSE podcast logo, and down at the bottom of that page is a contact form where you can send those in to us as well. So,
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, hey, thanks for being with us. And again, be sure and send through your questions through that PBSC contact form. And if you want in-depth questions answered right now, come and join with us in Dare to Connect.
yeah, absolutely. Have a great rest of your day, guys. We'll talk to you next time.
See ya.
Everything expressed on the PBSE podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.